Hello and welcome to EC&M Asks. This is a Q&A video series that readers pose their questions and our subject matters take their time and answer those questions. My name is Ryan Mayfield, founder of Mayfield Renewables. I've been in the solar industry since the late 90s, and I've been doing a lot of codes and standards trainings, and I'm heavily involved in that process. So I'm happy to be here and answering some of these questions. So question that came in from a reader today was, it's talking about connections from our PV system to the utility. And specifically the question is, when I make a supply side connection per 705.11, how do I ground the system since there aren't any specific requirements in that article? So it's a great question. It's one that we see come up quite often, actually. And so let's start off first. 705 is our section where we're talking about interconnecting multiple power sources. So, we're talking about connecting a PV system to the utility in this case. And 11 specifically is the source connections to a service. And so that language is from the 2023 version. And there's a little bit of a change from 2020, so it's important to notice. But the big thing here is for our connections, when we're making it to the supply side of a panel, so we are on the utility side of the main breaker is really the big thing here. So you have your service coming in, that's hitting the main breaker. We are allowed and very often want to connect to those service connectors ahead of that main breaker. What the 2023 language has done for us is kind of clarified some things, quite honestly, and it's making it so that we are treating this connection as if it were a service. So we're going to install it as if it were a service. We're going to put in disconnecting means, grounding and bonding, overcurrent protection, all those things as if it were a service. So kind of with that background set, the question is, talking specifically about grounding and bonding. So let's kind of dive into what those subset of rules are. So 705.11 has 6 subsections. One of them is grounding and bonding. Really, all 705.11 says is go back to Article 250 and ground and bond it per the requirements. So where do we start there? The place that we need to go to first is Article 250. So it's 250.25. And that section is titled Grounding of Systems Permitted to be Connected to the Supply Side of the Service Disconnect. So that's exactly who we are. That's what we're doing. We are a system that's allowed to connect to the supply side of the disconnect. And so this is telling us how do you ground that? So it's a relatively short article or section, and so it's going to push us back to 250.24 really quickly. And 250.24, not a new section, but there's a couple key subsections that I wanted to point out to you that helps understand what the requirements are. So 250.24C talks about installing the main bonding jumper. So it's telling us that we're going to bond the grounded conductor, the neutral, to our grounding system. So we're going to have a main bonding jumper, and we're going to install that in our disconnecting means. And then D, 250.24D, talks about running the grounded current carrying conductor with the ungrounded conductors. So what this is telling us is that from that connection inside the service, we're going to bring our ungrounded conductors, our phase conductors, and we're going to bring that neutral, the grounded current carrying conductor, and we're going to land those inside of our new PV system disconnect, which is, we're going to install it just like a service disconnect. We're going to treat it like a service disconnect. So the conduit, all that kind of stuff that we're going to place in there, we're going to treat it as if it were a service. So one of the big things in there is we're going to bond the neutral to ground inside that PV system disconnect. Now, the requirements for moving beyond that in terms of neutral specifically, it's specific to your PV system. So we're going to kind of stop and just talk about the grounding here, but just know that there is that aspect of it as well. So the next question that comes up, so we've identified, okay, we're going to install this service, we're going to bond the neutral and ground here. What about a grounding electrode conductor? And so that's probably the part that comes up the most. And so to understand this, we're going to look at 250.64. And so that is grounding electrode conductor installation. So 250.64 is where we're going to look at this. And specifically, we're going to jump down to D as in Delta, and that is building or structure with multiple disconnecting means in separate enclosures. So again, this is what we're doing. Very often, we are installing a separate enclosure with our PV system disconnecting means separate from the service. And so this subsection is telling us, how do we install the grounding electrode conductor for that specific application? And really what we're given are three different options. So we're given a common grounding electrode conductor. And so what that means is we could, from our PV system disconnect, we could come out of that with the grounding electrode conductor, and we could just connect to the existing grounding electrode conductor. And so we're gonna have to do that with an irreversible splice, following those rules, but that would be one way of meeting that requirement. There's also the option of individual grounding electrode conductors. So you could run a independent grounding electrode conductor all the way to the grounding electrode. That would be an acceptable method. And then the third way, which I try and steer people towards, quite honestly, is this common location. So you have a grounding electrode conductor and a grounding electrode already installed at that service. And if you were to install in those two parts that I just referred to, the common or the individual grounding electrode conductors, you would be to code. But what you would really be doing is installing a parallel conductor. So you would have your neutral is going to be bonded to the ground on both ends. And so you would have a conductor those two conductors would be put in parallel. So safety-wise and everything, I would say it's not absolute necessity, but this is one of those things where highly recommend talking to your AHJs, because they tend to have specific requirements or specific ideas about this. And as I mentioned, there's three different ways you can do it and being code compliant. So just keep that in mind when you're doing those. So don't absolutely have to run it. There's nothing in code says you absolutely have to run it, but it is definitely something that you can do. So hopefully that is helpful for you, and it's about all the time we have for answering that specific question. Look forward to seeing you on other EC&M Asks episodes, and thank you for your time.